2023. Welcome, everyone. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This board consists of 7 members and 1 alternate who are appointed by the City Council and serve voluntarily. I'm Mary Lau, and I will ask the other members and staff to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Mike Flannery.
Aubrey Holdreport.
Jay Daniel, attorney for the board.
Rosemary Call, City Clerk.
Matt Minnage, Assistant City Attorney.
Lauren Matzke, Planning and Development.
Gina Clayton, Planning and Development.
Samuel Hutkin.
Bruce Rector.
Andy Park.
John Quattrocki.
Please remember to turn off your cell phones so that they do not become a distraction during the meeting. Please also refrain from having conversations in this room so that we might hear all the testimony given today. To ensure a complete record of this board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak, including the applicant, speak into the microphone at the podium in front of us. Clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. Now I will ask all those in attendance today who plan to speak to please rise and be sworn in by the clerk.
Do you affirm to tell the truth throughout your entire testimony?
I do.
Agendas of today's meeting are on the podium to your left near the entry door. Also on this podium are a roster of the Community Development Board, the list of city staff experts and their resumes, the board's rules of procedures, and the annual schedule of this board. Our first order of business is to review and approve the minutes from last month's meeting. May I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Our next order of business is to hear from citizens who wish to be heard on any item that is not on today's agenda. Is there anyone present that would like to speak about anything that's not on the agenda? All right. Our regular agenda, we begin with the level 3 item that was continued to today's meeting from prior meetings, case TA 2022-09001, amendments to the Community Development Code. The applicant is the City of Clearwater. The board is reviewing a request to amend the Community Development Code to clarify, change, or add requirements or standards in Article 2 to address community gardens in the OSR district and detached dwellings and residential infill projects in the MDR district, in Article 3 regarding fences and walls, mixed-use projects, home-based businesses, landscaping, parking restrictions, various sign provisions, temporary uses, dog-friendly dining and community gardens, Article 4 for pre-application meetings and development agreements, Article 8 definitions, Appendix B in the US 19 zoning district, and development standards regarding general provisions, regulating plan, sub-district, street frontage, site design, and building design standards, flexibility, and administration, and Appendix C downtown district and development standards regarding general provisions, regulating plan, character district, frontage, site design, and building design standards, flexibility, and administration, and making recommendation to the City Council. Ms. Matzke, I believe you're going to present for us.
I am.
Madam Chair, would you please review the level 3 procedures before we begin with staff?
Of course. All level 3 cases such as a plan amendment, rezoning, or development agreement are considered legislative hearings. The Community Development Board reviews the application, the staff report, correspondence, and all evidence presented today and makes a recommendation to the City Council. For level 3 applications, the City Council makes the final decision. The procedure for all level 3 cases is as follows. Presentation by planning staff, 10 minutes maximum. Presentation by the applicant, 10 minutes maximum. Comments by the public, 3 minutes per person. Closing remarks by the planning and development staff, 3 minutes maximum. Closing remarks by the applicant, 3 minutes maximum. Closing of the public hearing, discussion and vote by the board. All right.
All right.
Good afternoon, Lauren Matzke with Planning and Development. Just in reading the request, you can tell that there are a wide variety of topics that were covered within this text amendment. It's proposed ordinance 9643-23. So to cover it initially, I just wanted to say there's a lot of things that are proposed in there that are little bits of clarifications and kind of adding some citations and such, so I'm not going to go over all of those changes. I hope to make it through in my 9.5 minutes left. As noted in the staff report, a number of things came from previous direction from City Council, so I'll make sure to point those out. Additionally, there were some changes made to the countywide rules that allow us to enable a few things, so those are addressed. We had an objective of streamlining certain processes, and then, as I just mentioned, providing clarity where possible. The bulk of the amendments were in the US 19 and downtown districts, so I'll cut through the early ones quickly. Community gardens, the primary thing was to allow these in the open space recreation district where previously they were not allowed. And additionally, the countywide rules allowed for the permitting of on-site sales for certain community gardens, and we're proposing to allow that in the commercial, institutional, and downtown districts. There's operational requirements proposed to deal with what the sales could be, and also for fences in community gardens where the code was silent. The second piece is to change, I apologize. I should note, I'm going to work through it kind of in order that things generally came in the ordinance. This is like I did with the staff report, so thank you. The second piece is in the medium density residential district. Staff and the Community Development Board have likely noticed that we've had several projects come through in the past year. I believe most of them were affordable housing projects that needed to go to the board specifically for front setback flexibility or primarily for front setbacks flexibility if they were on residential or corner lots rather. So staff is proposing to allow additional front setback flexibility for detached dwellings through the FLS process. That would allow them to a more streamlined process for that. And then additionally creating the residential infill projects use at an FLS. The provisions that are in the ordinance are consistent with that which is already written for the low medium density residential district. So same rules, just in a different zoning district. So for some reason, they weren't allowed in medium density residential where it was in the low medium density residential. Another big piece of this code was related to fences and walls. Initially, council had directed staff to look at corner lots where, as y'all know, they can have 2 or more fronts and they have to comply with the front setbacks as a result. And city council wanted to allow up to 6 feet high non-opaque fence on what would be kind of the secondary frontage. So the way the code describes it, it's the addressed front and then all other non-addressed front property lines would be treated as sides. So that was our initial objective, but additionally staff has worked a lot in the fence code and had some proposed changes that would hopefully make it easier for the general users of the code, including calling out special districts and plan areas like Beach by Design, the US 19 district, downtown district, so people were aware that there could be other regulations pertaining to fences. Also calling out site visibility triangles, because we find sometimes people just forget that that's required. The landscape requirement is proposed to be moved and it's actually duplicated, so it would be in each section that would potentially apply. Again, looking at the user experience, and if it's kind of tucked in, it sometimes gets missed, so this hopefully puts it in a more clear place for users. And then it calls out entry components. We often find that we're asked about gates, trellises, other structures that could be used to create an entryway. Otherwise, though, incorporated into the fence, and this sets some provisions for that. And then most importantly, adding graphics throughout. And I realize I already touched on this because this was the main impetus for this particular section of code, and this is where the non-opaque or open style fences would be allowed. This is an example of the graphic that could go along with that. So again, allowing them the taller fences on the non-addressed front property lines and maintaining the 4-foot max height along the addressed front property line. And then additionally, where I mentioned the landscaping provisions, the code requires that if a fence is in front of a structure and that fence exceeds 3 feet in height, then a 3-foot wide landscaping strip must be provided. That's the section that I said is maintained but moved, and so it appears in the section regarding corner lots, and it also is copied over into the section regarding fronts. There are several smaller pieces in here, but in order that they come in the code, for mixed-use districts, the countywide rules allows us to they call it a bonus, but allows for vertical mixed-use projects to not have to utilize the proportionate share mixed-use calculation for it. So that is enabled through this proposed ordinance in the downtown district. That's the district that meets all of the other requirements in the countywide rules to be able to apply this. In the general landscaping standards, council had directed us to allow for artificial turf in parks and on athletic fields. These are somewhat normal applications of it, but our code was silent, so this provides that clarity. Parking restrictions, this is something that came up through working with our code compliance division when we rezoned downtown to certain districts to be all one unified zoning district. It had the inadvertent impact to those residential areas. Our existing parking restrictions no longer apply because they currently apply to residentially zoned districts, and these are not necessarily residentially zoned because downtown is a mixed-use district. So we looked at those streets that are intended to be 100% residential through the code and created a new definition, residentially designated downtown property, and thus the existing residential parking restrictions would apply on those streets as well in downtown. Additionally, in looking at the code, we've realized that boats are currently allowed to be parked in the street right-of-way in non-residential areas, so that provision has been included. So that's more of a safety issue, not parking your boats in the street. There's a few different provisions in the sign code. The first is to prohibit the use of LED rope lighting around windows and doors. Sounds like an odd place for it to be in the sign code, but the actual provision that says that this type of lighting is not a sign is within there. So that is where this specific prohibition is proposed to be included. Currently, we do prohibit it in the use of these lights in downtown specifically, and this would make it a citywide prohibition. You'll see a couple of places where sign permits may or may not have had a renewal date, so those are added in, including in this area for sidewalk sign permits. And then one of council's directions was to address the ability to have a marquee in downtown. We have the Capitol Theater here, and that would be a good place for something like that. So this does set some standards for attached electronic changeable message signage in downtown specifically, and that venue would have to be 750 or more seats. It has to be integrated into the sign design very specifically, and it sets the maximum changing of the sign every 15 seconds. And then existing code was changed to be freestanding changeable message board signs. The dog-friendly dining is just the renewal dates again. Pre-application conferences, this would require all projects in US 19 and downtown districts to have a mandatory pre-app meeting unless the community development coordinator or director waives that. These are more complex codes, and we find that having that pre-app meeting, many people do avail themselves of it, but it's not required. But the overall project, I think the project process will go smoother if we make sure that we're all on the same page at the beginning. And then last on this page, development agreements, there's two pieces. One would be to extend the duration up to 30 years. This is consistent with council direction as they were approving the Bluff projects, and I am not going to hit 10 minutes. And also allows our annual reports to be presented to council only if there are issues with compliance. And there's a few changes to definitions and new definitions added. In US 19, there's a variety of things. I'll touch on just the highlights. Bicycle parking is proposed to be changed and then also be required to be addressed at changes of use or when they're remodeling to be able to incrementally allow or start to get more bike parking added in. Additionally, it proposes to add long-term bike parking standards. Bigger changes on this would be to require projects on larger sites. I guess I would like to request additional time.
I would, because as I understand it,
You can grant additional time if there are no objections from the board. If there are objections, we can discuss it.
and if my understanding is, in this particular case, the planning staff and the applicant are the same. So based on that, I would suggest we allow Ms. Matzke to complete her presentation. All right.
Down to the last two districts. Thank you very much. So that was the bicycle parking. We realized that with changes of use or as people are incrementally adapting their properties and maybe expanding them, it is an opportunity to start integrating in more bicycle parking. I was going to say, okay, so requiring an FLS for projects on 10 plus acres. You may recall that the US 19 district sets different standards for these larger properties. This is where our goal is to create a more urban form, and there are certain block requirements. So the sites have to be integrated into an urban form with primary and secondary drives, and that sets setbacks, et cetera. So coupling a mandatory pre-application meeting with the ability to process these to require a full site plan review, I think would make for a stronger project and ultimately shorten the time, I think, for our applicants. What's happening now is if they come in and they're able to, they can come for a building permit directly. And as changes are made through the review process, it's a little bit more complex to make those changes on their plans because a shift of a setback or some other thing that could have been missed, can require a much more intensive redesign of their site. In talking with our applicants and also based on experience, we're noticing that the window transparency requirements are not necessarily being met at the time of construction. So the code is intended to have very minimal tinting, but based on everything, it seems like there's a difference in terminology. So we've worked with some architects and come up with proposed language changes, but ultimately the provision is the same. The goal is still to have clear, transparent windows, not mirrored, not finished, but updating to utilize the same type of terminology that window manufacturers use and architects are familiar with. The site design standards, cross-parcel connections are currently required, but it's not necessarily to all abutting sites. It does say undeveloped, so this proposes to change that to all abutting sites. And it allows for stub outs for those properties where there may not be a possible connection at this time, but the goal is obviously at the time of redevelopment as we start to see more changes in the corridor, we start to stitch the properties back together. And then the last is for the building design standards, establishing a requirement for upper floors to have windows. Currently, the code focuses on the ground floor. That is the area that we're most concerned about from that pedestrian and walkability perspective. But we did have some buildings come through that had very limited to no windows on upper floors due to their use, and this is something to address that. And then mechanical equipment screening, we wanted to provide additional options for rooftop mechanical and really clarify that. Flexibility in US 19 is specifically limited in certain ways. So for those areas where if there isn't flexibility spelled out, it's not able to be requested. So in this instance, there's certain things that are proposed just for reorganization and adding figures to the flexibility. That's specifically for flexibility for building entries and transparency. No major changes there, just some restructuring. Adding flexibility in US 19 for finished floor elevation. Residential uses currently have to provide a finished floor elevation between 18 inches and 36 inches or 3 feet. And on sloping sites, we found that that's, more challenging to do. So the proposal is to allow up to 4 feet on sloping sites. And then also to allow those portions of a residential building that are occupied by a non-residential use, such as a lobby, the entry, those could have lower finished floor elevations. And then where I talked about the cross-parcel connections, making them required for all abutting sites, it does also, the flexibility is proposed to allow our community development coordinator to waive those requirements if the applicant has shown that it demonstrates that they've exhausted all possible options and an easement just isn't possible. Sometimes that might happen, and this allows staff, this gives the direction on what to do in that instance. And then lastly in this section, there are special project types defined in US 19, and there's flexibility for those. These are kind of those, you can't account for everything in a code. Sometimes you try to, but you can't always. And some projects are going to have, just some thing that it provides to the city that would mean that we might want to provide a little bit more flexibility in different ways. In this instance, the proposal is for employment-intensive projects. This is currently in the code, but the acreage threshold is 5 acres in order to qualify for this. This would reduce the acreage threshold to 2.5 acres. So they would still have to demonstrate that their project creates those jobs that are at the higher end of incomes. Our economic development and housing group would need to certify that it would meet that, but they wouldn't necessarily have to aggregate 5 acres. They could aggregate 2.5 and be able to avail themselves of this flexibility. Downtown is very similar, so I bulleted that out, but I'll try to keep it a little bit shorter. Sometimes we try to allow some flexibility, but we want them to meet the standards to the greatest extent practicable. So you probably saw that language was added in multiple places. The regulating plan maps are updated where a few streets did not have the street type designations. We inadvertently left those off, so those are proposed to be added on the maps. And then also there are a couple of landlocked parcels in downtown, and the way the code works, the setbacks and certain other provisions are assigned by street type. So these would not be on a street, therefore they wouldn't have had a street type assigned, and we needed to come up with a way to establish what setbacks they would have to meet. So this would allow us to work with the applicant and also let the community development coordinator be part of that. In the character districts, a lot of this is carrying forward stuff like the vertical mixed use. The use and off-street parking table, there's a couple of different things. Adding community gardens, which is part of the broader ordinance. Correcting overnight accommodations in the South Gateway. The table accidentally or inadvertently said that they were allowed, and they're not, so this fixes that. And that's consistent with the maps and everything that establishes the density in the Clearwater downtown redevelopment plan. So it was already established that it was prohibited. It just wasn't correct in the table. Additionally, this proposes to allow self-storage facilities in the downtown Gateway Character District, and it revises use-specific criteria that would apply to all self-storage facilities. They're currently allowed as, as an accessory use to a broader use. So they are, accommodated for in downtown, but this would expand to allow them also in the downtown Gateway. And then similarly, there's some changes to bike parking. Primarily in downtown, it's to provide reference to the broader bike parking standards for the city, not changes to how much parking is required, but if short-term parking is provided, what it needs to look like. In the frontage standards, there's some more clarification, similar changes to the window transparency terminology. We have had the experience now with U-shaped buildings in downtown, so that was something that the code didn't necessarily readily accommodate. It wasn't intentionally left out. It's just that we're thinking more, buildings all across the front, but U-shaped buildings are not uncommon and, can help meet our overall objectives for downtown. So this addresses that. If you were to have a U-shaped building, those two legs of your building, how far apart could they be spaced? Because the code does have building spacing requirements, so this helps define that for everyone. Lastly, where the neighborhood conservation frontage is located on a collector street, this would allow 3 units where currently only 2 would be allowed. The neighborhood conservation frontage is applied in a small area of downtown where the character is predominantly the larger setback residential, primarily single-family homes. There's only a few streets, but it did include a portion of Cleveland Street, which is a collector street. But because those areas are predominantly single-family, larger setback, and we didn't want, the code wasn't intending to make major changes to these areas. It currently only permits a maximum of 2 units on those sites, whether it be a duplex or a single family with a carriage house, a second unit on it. This would allow that 3rd unit, so you could have a duplex plus a carriage house on these collector streets only. We've discussed the cross-parcel connection, so this is similar to, or this is consistent with US 19. Of course, our goal is always to make both codes consistent on those provisions that are intended to meet the same things. Since US 19 does not allow detached dwellings or duplexes, but, detached dwellings, but downtown does. There was a provision that requires vehicular connectivity and additional pedestrian walkways, and so this provides an exemption for detached dwellings and duplexes on internal lots, where you would not normally have that kind of connection. It's a different function, but this would not exempt them from providing reconstructed sidewalks, for example. And swimming pools, we also now have enough experience working with that this would set a new standard for swimming pools. To set the default or the base provision would be that they would have to be on the roof of a building or a fully enclosed courtyard, so all 4 sides building. And then you'll see in a few minutes when I click through the flexibility, then we created new flexibility to allow for the U-shaped buildings or L-shaped buildings. Oh, there's the building design standard. Sorry about that. In flexibility, there were a few things that have come up over time with new buildings. One is related to building step backs. This is to provide some relief for people along the street where you want to have interest and a little bit of more space and other design features like that. But currently the step backs would be required on all sides of a building that are on a public right-of-way or street. This would change that to where the step backs would be required, but they could provide alternative designs. And then parking garages, it's not very feasible to have a step back integrated into the parking garage. So this would be either freestanding or integrated parking garages, giving some flexibility regarding where a step back or where that additional relief is required. I've mentioned the U-shaped buildings, also allowing some flexibility. They could request additional building spacing for that. Same changes for finished floor elevations. And then on this page, something that would be relevant that is only in downtown, parking, limited surface parking. This would allow limited surface parking expansion for existing offices. Offices are uses that we need to support in downtown, and there are some that exist that may need to provide a little bit of additional, they may need to provide more, but to still meet the overall goals and objectives and urban form requirements for a downtown. This would provide a little bit of relief to them if they had the ability to add to it within the same block and abutting that property. The downtown district does not currently provide any relief for the pedestrian walkways, which are required to be 6 feet. So this proposes them to meet it to the maximum extent practicable. Sometimes you're going to need a little bit of relief from that walkway requirement. I mentioned the new swimming pool standards, flexibility, and we do have very few, but a couple of buildings that could be within a flood zone. So this would allow some flexibility for buildings in flood zones, and then of course for historic properties. When we review these, we review to make sure that any of the code amendments are consistent with the comprehensive plan. They must also further the purposes of the Community Development Code, and the staff report that was attached gives a much more detailed explanation of how this proposed amendment meets both. And so with that, thank you very much for the additional time. And I
Are
can
there
answer
questions from the board for Ms. Netsky?
I do have questions later on. Is this a good time to ask on specific things, or should I, or
Yeah.
somebody want to be heard first?
I was just going to ask the process that you went through. You alluded to the fact that you took input from council and from other places, but as far as the actual, was there like working groups that got together? Was there input from the public, any of that kind of stuff? How did that work?
Not for this one. In the past, we do try to do that. We've had very topic-specific code amendments of late, and we've also taken a short break from some of the code amendments that are like this, where they come from a variety of sources. So the city council direction came over the course of a couple of years, different meetings that they had, and we just, finally got it all integrated in to one. The US 19 and downtown district, a lot of those recommendations come just from the more experience we have with new development, the things we see our development review team, provides suggestions throughout, and then, working with different applicants.
We're not involved in any of that kind of?
No, sir. We did not do any outreach specific to this one.
A specific question, like, as far as the number, as far as seats for like a marquee sign, like, how did you come up with that number? How did that work into the plan, when you come up with like 700, I think it was 750?
750.
Plus.
Yeah,
I would defer to Jane for
okay,
that
yeah,
one.
I think the goal really was to address our Capitol Theater, and that we didn't want to allow the I can't even talk today, thank you, on every kind of business in downtown. And so we looked at downtown, it is an entertainment district, and you find theaters throughout the country that have, marquees, and that's how we
Like
decided.
the average mean, as far as looking at other areas to say this was the number, kind of where if it was
Actually,
lower.
the number of seats are the sign area.
I think what I read was that if it's this amount of seats, then you can allow a marquee sign to be a certain size. I think, is that what I read?
No, it's that you can only ask for an electronic changeable marquee if you are a venue of some kind that has at least 750 seats. So, for example, the L. Ron Hubbard Hall, if that gets built, it would be able to avail themselves to that. Capitol Theater could. But really, we want to limit electronic changeable messages, and that's been pretty clear in our sign code for years. Like right now, the only places that can have it are venues that are 2,000 seats and more, and those are for freestanding signs. So the baseball stadium has one, and Ruth Eckerd Hall has one. And since in downtown we don't support freestanding signs, this allowance allows it on the building.
That's good. Good. Yeah, I have a number of specific, as they go through them, how they actually specifically apply to things that I know of.
Okay.
One of them is, thank you for the work on the community garden. You know of my long-term interest in community gardens. One of them is a 6-foot fence, a 4-foot versus 6-foot. And at the one that we have on Grove Street, we need a 6-foot fence, because what essentially is a 4-foot fence would be developing an attractive nuisance. To me, there's some tomatoes. Let's go over and jump this fence and get it. And there's nobody there much of the time. Already we have people taking other things out of the garden. And the same parallel runs at the Clearwater Garden Club, where they have a 6-foot, both places we already have a 6-foot fence. But I would like to make sure that, yes, I would prefer if you didn't need a fence, like it was part of a church or something, that there's no reason to put up a fence. I've seen it done. Dunedin doesn't have a big fence, but they're next to the fire station. But if there's gardens in the middle of nowhere, like some of these are, where nobody's around to watch them, a 6-foot fence keeps people from wanting to jump over and grab the vegetables and take the food off of there. So I think if that could be made, move back to a 6-foot fence in those locations, maybe some wording where it is of shown that it can reduce unauthorized entrance, something on that order. But those are two places that I think it would really would help. That's the first comment.
Are you still okay with them being opaque?
That's on page 19 for anyone following along in the ordinance. So I was just letting anyone following along in the actual ordinance, that's on page 19 of the ordinance, where it talks about the operational requirements for community gardens. So we could look to see how to incorporate a potential allowance up to 6 feet in certain.
Because, yeah, it's an attractive nuisance. It's liability with adding to the garden, just people jumping and then taking stuff. Not even the theft, if somebody can hurt themselves by unauthorized access.
And where city council had directed us to potentially allow up to 6 feet in front of structures, they were clear that it needed to be the non-opaque, so picket fence or something like that. Is that?
It can be added before it's cut in stone. That would help. Second one is marquee signs. I've been involved with 2 marquee signs. One of them is, there's one located existing at the corner of Seminole Street and North Fort Harrison. It's existing and it's being used. But right now, the lights have been out for a while. I've been getting there. We've been doing the electrical ourselves, getting it up to speed. But it advertises the garden club, which is on the corner. But mostly it's for the Francis Wilson Playhouse. And they would really be nice if they could have. We have always teamed together on that. I don't know historically if there's a contract or not, but we're 2 organizations that have been developed and cited by the city years ago. And we work together as community agencies, and would like to, we have this sign existing, and I figure we can probably keep that, but we have been looking at having a lighted sign there that could go for some period of time for the club. The latest presentation they're making at the Francis Wilson Playhouse, and then flip maybe to the other one that has to do with the garden club, because we have events and things that we do there, and it'd be nice if we could work that. That's one of our goals, if that can be made to work. I mean, it's not a deal breaker for everything, but I understand it can get out of hand. But we were looking at doing that already.
How would you word that, though, to just give that? I mean, I'm just wondering about how the wording would be, to be able to just...
Yeah, and you know where it is, just as you go down to the...
I do.
Yeah, this boat ramp.
Well, I think part of the issue is that would be an off-premise sign, which our code does not support. So right there, it presents an issue to us. I know that the Francis Wilson Playhouse has a changeable copy sign at their building. I think they do. But having, something off-site is not going to be allowed, and I would not be supportive of trying to open up the code for off-premise signs.
Can the original one stay there and as grandfathered in?
I don't think you've had any code enforcement action on whatever sign that is. I'm not sure what it is.
We can deal with that later. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but it is a community benefit to have one there that allows people to see what's happening at the Playhouse. Okay.
That's where I was wondering with the signs, because sometimes those signs can be useful, but I get where Gene's coming, because you don't want Broadway down. That's bad again.
I think it's more like, it's like a billboard, which we don't allow, that it's prohibited, that it's off-site advertising for use that isn't on the same property. But that's really, I think, the issue that I have. I just would like to get clarification too, on the fence matter being a potential 6 feet height. You're talking about on the front property line, because the side and the rear is at 6.
Actually, it's on the front property line. The address for the garden club is on Seminole, not on Fort Harrison. So as a detail, trivial, but it is by the power pole and everything. It's off premises, I'd say.
I'm sorry, I switched gears on you. I was talking about the
He's talking about the,
Let's
she
go
just
back
wants
to
to
the
clarify.
community garden.
Oh, the community garden. It's,
The change you're asking the board to support us making would be to have a 6-foot-high fence on
Instead
the
of 4.
front property line.
instead of limiting it to 4 foot, make that 6 foot.
But on the front property line, I think is what she was.
Yes, well,
Is there any other?
we need it all the way around, because even the back.
You already said it's already on
apartment.
the side.
It's allowed on the side.
It's allowed-
As proposed, it would allow 6 feet on the
So
side
anyway,
and
that would
rear,
be-
and it would...
If you look at the property, I think you'll see what we're looking at, and if it can be fit in, that would be the time to do it, if you can be.
Could you use language to the effect up to 6 feet, as opposed to having something specific to community garden properties? Or are you pretty well wedded to the 4-foot max on the front property lines of different kinds of properties?
You want to answer?
Go ahead.
Well, I think that we only allow open-style fences in the front yard on any property. So we would want to, if your recommendation to council is that we increase it to 6, I think we'd like to see that continued. If we make that change elsewhere in the fence code, it would apply citywide, which I don't think meets our objectives.
It sounds like Mr. Flannery's most important intent is just to have a fence high enough where people can't jump over it.
Right, that's my concern. That it's, otherwise it'd be nice if it was low. We'd love it to have it low. There's no reason except for people can jump it and they want to get the things inside, the vegetables that's, they want to cherry pick. Whatever. Clever, huh?
That's right.
So, anyway, I'd like to, if you get around that one, if you could look at that one, that would be appreciated. I do have a couple of other questions. It talks about the pre-construction conference. Oh, the one of them is that the development coordinator seems to have, what is the options for if somebody does not agree with what the development coordinator says can be allowed? Is there a way out? Is there a petition way? It's probably in the code someplace, but I just didn't find it.
Are you just talking about in general? Because...
Yeah, in general, if somebody does not, it mentions several places that I'll look up one real quick, but it's...
You're correct. I mean,
You know what I'm
there
talking-
were several locations where
Yeah.
it otherwise granted the community
Is there an appeal
coordinator the
process?
ability to, yes.
It's in someplace else, so you'll find it. I don't need you to go find it for me. Tell me it's there, I'm good enough
In
with
the
that.
appeals section, it says any decision made by the community development coordinator can be appealed to you, the CDP.
Okay, just wanted to check on that.
As it relates to the pre-application conference, though, are they actually approving anything, or are they just providing feedback?
It would be providing feedback. The idea was, instead of trying to set a threshold for a meeting, if it's a change of use and it's very simple, no changes, it's unlikely that a pre-application meeting would be needed. And this would allow the director of the department to give that ability to say we don't need one.
And on a final one here is, with the pre-construction conference, is that one that the public can join in? Or at which point in the process does this change where a concerned citizen might be raising interest? And that's been a sore point with me in a way that, just because the way, not our staff, but the way that things are organized, that by the time it's all canned, the citizens don't have a chance, that may be living by, don't have a chance to say anything about it. Can they come to this pre-construction meeting or what?
They're online. They're not noticed meetings. They're held every week. Some people have requested and are on the agendas every week by choice. These are...
I would say these are not public meetings. These are meetings with the applicant to understand what it is they're trying to propose, make them aware of any code section. It is not an official approval process. It's not
My bad.
anything. So the public would be able to be involved through the DRC meeting if there was one needed, or the CDB process.
I just wanted to raise how that works while I can now. My chance to do that.
Yes.
Those were, and I hope the swimming pool solves some of those problems we've had before with them on a corner and how you cover them, and been a terrible ones to have people building a swimming pool and don't know how to build it. Now I think this solves some of that.
This would be applicable in downtown, so some of the ones that have come through have been in other
Mostly the
zoning
downtown
districts.
ones, okay. Also, I think we were given a piece of a discussion here point that was prepared by Mr. Johnson. Is there a chance that he can talk about that, or we can, I don't know how that comes in here at all.
I'm advised, this relates to item 2 on the staff report, and just a series of questions, and it's up to the board if we want to ask those
I have
questions.
some other questions ahead of
Yeah, we'll get to that after everybody's done asking their questions, but my understanding is if the board agrees that we should ask the questions, I can ask them of Ms. Maskey and not take any of Mr. Johnson's time. And Ms. Maskey, it's in her discretion whether she wants to answer the questions or not. All right? So are you finished?
I'm done.
All right. Mr. Kotaki?
Well, and I just have first, appreciate all the time and effort. Page 9, if you wouldn't mind. Just clarification for me on the fences there. As we get down to C, corner multi-frontage lots.
Yes.
Okay, I just want to, if I'm understanding it, we got a lot of crossed out and things and referencing back other sections and limited time to review. Corner lot, multi-frontage lots, and designating, obviously we're identifying now what is the lot frontage and what we've done here. And are the side, such as what you have here, if you have a property who has 2 side, in the description above, that's adhering to this, property lines? Item C2. So if this is residential,
Yes. Well, yes.
right?
Not limited. Not called out for a specific zoning district.
Okay, would it apply to residential?
Yes.
Okay. So am I reading this that basically somebody could not have a privacy fence, so to speak, there? They would,
Not in front of their property line.
or the side property lines?
They could have it on their side, behind the principal structure. So any portion of the fence that would be in front of the property would be required to be open style. That was,
If it's 6 feet.
if it's 6 feet. So currently, using the graphic, and I pulled it back up the slide, this is one of the few graphics I pasted in. Currently, anything in this area between the principal structure and the front property line, so in this instance, just any of this area would have been limited to a 4-foot fence.
Right.
Recognizing that, and same on this side. So what most people consider to be a side of their building, it just happens to be on a corner lot, so it's 2 front property lines. They would have been limited to a 4-foot fence right in this area here on the bottom portion of that picture. Going forward, they would be allowed a 6-foot fence on this portion between the principal structure and the non-addressed front/side. But if they choose to put a 6-foot fence, it would be non-opaque, open style. That was consistent with the direction from City Council.
So they could not put
They could not put a privacy fence there. If they, using this as an example, they could have a privacy fence, in line with behind the principal structure further back. But if they want to integrate in more of their yard, what is still officially their front yard, then it would need to be open style.
So if you have a corner lot, you can't have a privacy fence?
Not all the way up at the sidewalk, not at your property line. So again, you could have a privacy fence. It would have to be set back in line with your principal structure, your house. But if you have a fence for security purposes, it could be.
So what you're saying, if I'm understanding this correctly, looking at the that photo that you have there, the top property line. And you're taking so if that's like the garage that's sticking out on the bottom or whatever the case is, so that top property line, you bring your fence, we're looking at two different pictures, I'm not looking at the same one. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, the one that goes with that text spills over
Yeah.
onto page 10. The one on the slide is the same as the one on the 10. This is for corner lots.
Yeah, okay, so that, the fence, I got what you're saying. Okay, so you could have a privacy fence on the, as I'm looking at the photo there, my left property line side, which is the back, the opposite of where your address property is, right? That's a privacy fence 6 foot tall. To that corner where you've got the crossed hash on the bottom, which, right there.
Yep.
And that could be a privacy fence where you're going right there too?
Yes.
6 foot tall, opaque?
Yes.
And on the other property line, the same thing. So you could have a tree
Yes.
up on the top?
Right here, along that sideline, and along this sideline up to,
That
edge of
corner,
the
yeah.
house.
6 foot, opaque,
correct.
okay. So in essence, they could have a corner lot, it could be completely privacy, okay. As long as they're staying with the corners of the structure.
But we found that some people would like, higher than 4-foot fences in front of their houses. And
Yeah.
so, and the landscaping requirement would still apply in this instance. So there is the ability to provide privacy through landscaping.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, fences are,
Oh, that's a big thing.
they're fun.
And by the way, we do not regulate hedges as fences.
Right, so they
like
could-
communities do, so that's also an
Yeah, privacy. Another question I had, if you could just clarify page 14, parking restrictions, again, in our residential areas. As this has come in front of us numerous times as well, and code enforcement as well, as we get looking in that first paragraph, restrictions. The following parking restrictions shall apply except as provided in paragraph B of this section. Within street right-of-ways, the following vehicles shall not be parked or stored in any public right-of-way in a residential zone district, and so on. So I understand about the store, but when we get into parked, and we say boat or trailer, and basically those things are, not attached to a vehicle or a car, if somebody were to pull up or whatever, hauling trailers and such, but the one question C above, any of the following recreational vehicles, travelers, motorhomes, camping, and trailers. Motorhomes, they're not attached to anything, they're just individual motorhomes, so can a vehicle come and park on the street? And when we say parking, parking is what? What's the is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it 4 hours? Or is it 5 minutes? Or a minute? I know we're getting into it's not being extended to stay, but we have neighbors and they're going to call and they're going to complain about certain things that are on there, so it's just I understand, as we've looked at it before, travel trailers and things, and people put work vehicles out there, they put the trailers and they detach them from the hitch, and it's just sitting out on the street, or a motorhome also detached. But this is just meant to stop parking for like extended stays of times, because some of these motorhomes obviously don't even fit into driveways. So that's all I was just asking for. Is that meaning is supposed to be intended to that? That's all. That motorhomes are not allowed to park on neighborhood
Right,
streets.
there's no duration within this provision.
Okay.
That's
want
pretty
clarification.
tough. Your ditch does hit your car, and you take it off your hitch, and you leave it there for a few minutes, and they call, your neighbors call?
No, these are motorhomes. These aren't attached to your car. This is actually the big motorhome.
Somebody bring your...
No, not trailers. This isn't trailer. I understand that. I'm just actual motorhomes. So you're driving in your motorhome and you go visit somebody and you park in front of their house. You can't do that. I understand it. If you,
And some of those are huge.
yeah, they don't fit in driveways. So I'm just, not that the law enforcement's out there trying to get people that are parking for an hour or 5 hours or 10 hours or whatever you know,
Yeah, that falls under the purview of code enforcement, and so,
by the time somebody calls, they're,
realistically, no one's going to get
yeah.
a notice for
citation.
parking that there for a few minutes, and by the time someone calls and we go out there, hopefully they'll be gone. But I mean, I think the point is that we don't want our rights of way in residential areas to be used for these very large vehicles.
Right,
We had that,
clarification.
we had that on the beach and someone left their boat trailer or whatever, or a boat, yeah, for 3-4 days or a week.
Yeah.
And fire could not get by, and so therefore there was a conversation, a call.
I mean, I understand overnight completely, and
Yeah, but you
totally,
were
I'm
thinking-
just, and, motorhomes coming,
Yeah, to visit, my friend comes and comes.
Well, what you could do for a motorhome too is park the car on the street and then put the motorhome in the driveway.
No, but they're not allowed to do that either. Not allowed to be in the front of the house, right?
The regulations are based on size for boats, boat trailers.
Far back from the,
No.
You can park your motorhome if you're cleaning it out for, I think, a period of 24 hours or something like that, but if you want to permanently park it, I think what Lauren was going to tell you is that it needs to be in the side or the rear yard,
but
and it can be stored there.
But I also read in here, basically anything under 20 feet, you can park in your front. Is that right? If the trailer's under 20 feet, if your boat's under 20 feet, you can park that in your driveway, or even, which was new to me on it, that you could park it on a grass lot next to your driveway too, or on your grass siding, or whatever the case is.
If it's
I
under
think
20 feet, yeah.
if it's under 20 feet, you could pretty much put one vehicle, anything outside.
There's a section that says you can't park on the grass.
It's in here, it's okay.
In here.
You can park if it's parallel to your driveway and you're not killing the landscaping. So an occasional use of parking adjacent to your driveway on the grass is allowed, provided you are not, degrading that landscaping.
But you could park a boat on a trailer in the front yard,
In a driveway?
in a driveway or
Driveway in
off-site.
front. And that's happened, and it hasn't been abused, just to let you
Yeah.
know, in areas where it hasn't seemed to cause an issue in neighborhoods, at least in my neighborhood.
There's no size limit for motorhomes, I guess, parked behind this, or on your property, next to or behind your.
No.
Correct, it just has to be behind the fence.
Has to be behind.
And it has to meet the side setback and the rear
I know a
setback.
situation where a motorhome, a large one, was parked on the person's property, but it was right next to the fence of the other person's property, and there was this massive motorhome, and, you could see, and she could see in the windows, they could see, obviously, over her fence. It was right there, so you were saying that's still allowed, I guess?
That's allowed, that's been allowed for many years, so it was not part of the amendments we were
She was
proposing.
able to complain enough, I guess she got it removed.
Pardon me?
She was able to complain about it enough that she did get it removed.
Well, they have to be on pavement or, on paved strips parked, and they have to comply with the setbacks as well, so that may have been how the situation was resolved.
When it complies with the setback, it still has to be 5 feet from the other person's property line, right? Is that correct, a side setback?
If the district requires a 5-foot side setback.
Oh, it does,
yes.
Yeah, so it's not what you said.
No, this was literally all.
This is,
fence.
and that just happened in my neighborhood just now, where someone just did a trailer, just did that. There's a conversation, they called me up, and said it's gotta be 5 feet. And they, again, agreeability, and they moved it, yeah.
And you have a very large motorhome parked in a driveway that extends over the public sidewalk and to the road pavement. Is that okay?
No, you can't block sidewalks at all,
Can't block
right?
sidewalks,
Anything.
that's a whole,
Okay, that's what I thought.
Those are good questions.
yeah,
Okay.
situation.
All right,
I have
ready?
a question about the transparency of windows. Is that retroactive, or is that just for the downtown area?
The transparency of windows is in the US 19 district and in the downtown district. That would have been, the current was when those two districts were adopted. We have not made people take out their windows that were installed with more tinting than we would have allowed. We're trying to get that language clearer to avoid it happening, continuing to
Yeah, I'm just thinking
happen.
about the ones that are just completely painted over. You can't see it all inside
The way the two codes are organized, there's exemptions that, lay out specific situations where, you wouldn't necessarily need to comply with the standards in the code. So a change of use, does not necessarily kick in all of the standards. But the more you invest in the property, the more standards apply. So
There's some bars that do that, and there's also some smoke shops that do that also. I'm just curious how that works.
Any questions? Bruce? Anyone else have any questions? All right, we'll address the questions that I mentioned before. Mr. Bill Johnson, who is present, presented the board with a series of questions that relate to item 2 on page 2 and 3 of the staff report. What say you, board members? Should we go ahead and ask these questions? Everybody okay with that? All right. And Ms. Maskey, again, I think it's in your discretion whether and to what extent you answer these. All right, the first question is, what does the wording of the FLS MDR infill provision D.2 on page 5 of the proposed ordinance mean?
D5 res infill, you said? So that says the uses within the residential infill project are compatible with adjacent land uses. Gina and I can get into some of that, but I want to reiterate that this is the same language that's used for residential infill in numerous zoning districts. And one of the things that we've discussed is for the purposes of this, we utilize the exact same language. Again, I think I stated already, it's what's allowed in the low-medium density residential district, which is less urban than the medium density residential district. That being said, I think we always find opportunities where language could be refined, and we've discussed looking at the residential infill provisions for all of the zoning districts in our next code amendments that we would bring forward. So that doesn't answer his question specifically, but I did want to let the board know that. So, in terms of the specifics for residential infill and how we determine something to be compatible, our development review team looks at, sites in the vicinity, looks at past approvals and things of that nature, and makes a recommendation to, and at FLS, it would be to the community development coordinator.
All right, to streamline this a little bit, is it possible to get a copy of these questions to Ms. Matzke, so she'll have them in front of her?
Can I borrow your copy?
All right. The second question is, when the code was amended in 2000 to allow DRC approval for LDR and LMDR, the staff report justified such a change by saying because 21 applications were heard from LDR and LMDR and were relatively minor nature. And the question is, what is the history of MDR, medium density residential single family detached dwelling infill applications, the number in the last couple years and the amount of deviations requested? And a sub-question under that is, didn't the staff recommend approval of a 68% deviation to front setback for 1310 South Washington recently on September 20th? I believe that would have been 22.
I don't have a specific count. I know that several FLDs have been presented to the board for detached dwellings in the MDR district over the last several years. They were relatively routine in nature in terms of their requests for setback relief on, what we've been talking about with fences and everything. When you have a corner lot, you have multiple front setbacks, and those did just happen to be for affordable housing, but this would not be restricted to affordable housing. But otherwise, I don't have the exact numbers of those applications.
Could I just add one thing? Currently, residential infill does not exist in the MDR district. That is the situation we're trying to rectify to be consistent with the LMDR, LDR district. So that's it, so that a lot of these projects that in other districts can be approved by the staff at the DRC level and the MDR district, they've had to come to the board. So that's the situation right now we're trying to resolve with these amendments.
All right, the next question is, how is this amendment as currently written consistent with Section 1-103 CDC General Purposes, the eyes aren't working, B.2, ensuring that development and redevelopment will not have a negative impact on the value of surrounding properties, and D, make beautification of the city a matter of the highest priority and to require that existing and future uses and structures in the city are attractive.
Again, I think we're using the same language that has been found to be consistent previously, and there's no changes.
All right, the final question is, will staff ensure the burden of proof is on the applicant to provide substantial competent evidence that the criterion of infill is documented and submitted with the application?
I mean, clearly that's our goal. It's upon the applicant, but in many cases, homeowners that may avail themselves of this are sometimes challenged, and our staff provides a lot of assistance. Always our goal that the applicant provide us what we're asking for so that I can make a decision or you can make a decision in your capacity if you are reviewing flexibility.
All right. If there are no more questions, I believe this concludes the presentation by the planning staff and the applicant, the City of Clearwater.
Thank you very much for the discussion.
All right. We move on to comments by the public. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, members of the board. I am Bill Johnson, 2694 Redford Court. Speaking to Section 2 of the ordinance on page 3 relating to MDR infill, one of the purposes of the Clearwater Development Code, as stated in Section 1-103B2, is to ensure that redevelopment will not have a negative impact on the value of surrounding properties. And to our citizens, the biggest investment they make is in their home. They need to have confidence that the character and integrity of their neighborhood will be here for years to come. The 1999 pre-code allowed a traditional variance process where there was minor variances that could be approved by the staff, about 5%, 10%, and then non-minor went to a separate citizens board to consider those variances. The new code that came out in '99 made promises to the residents that they were going to be making some changes, but it would still enforce the integrity of the code, and so the two boards were collapsed. The Community Development Board became both the Variance Board and the Planning and Zoning Board, and a commitment was made to the residents, trust us, this will work. They created the two additional levels of flexibility standards, the flexible standard and then the flexible development. And they said that they were not allowing any more variances, but actually they created something called the infill, residential infill, for those unique conditions or historic patterns that could not otherwise be developed. And so they initially gave the CDB limited additional flexibility for those conditions. But then the code was watered down to allow within guidelines, instead of a specific variance maximum, it could be any variance that could be granted by the Community Development Board. Then that changed to allow the staff level to give that any level of variance without coming to the Community Development Board in the LDR and the LMDR. That's the area of concern that I think we have as far as the medium density residential, putting that in the same place. To give staff unrestricted variance approval without supervision of the Community Development Board is bad. And I think the decision should be made at the Community Development Board where public comment can be made. And thank you.
Thank you. right, closing remarks by the planning staff or the applicant?
I don't have any.
All right. Then I believe we're prepared to close the public hearing and have discussion and a vote by the board. Anyone have comments?
He's got.
Mr. Flannery.
I have two. One of them is sort of short. I don't want to hold up the whole process I've been working on because some of this is important. It's not my goal at all, all that. And I think our approval still has to go to the council. But I do hear, I think it's important that the things not be delegated all the way down to staff level if unnecessary. I mean, it's just bad for public input. I've worked in government for years. I've been guilty of it myself. I know what happens. And we try to make our decisions based upon what works and what we're used to, and I think it's important to not give too much of that away. So Mr. Johnson's comments should be listened to, and I'd like more time to digest them, or at least put in the note that this should be considered by the council, whether they want to give this away or not as a note. The second one is has to do with the 6-foot fence, that little technicality on that one, is whether that can be whether it can be changed or how that can be put in, because I think that really is I'm trying to point out with a 6-foot fence, not my favorite project, not because I like something there, it's just that on this one, I feel that's going to be a hazard to any community garden if they allow people to jump over a 4-foot fence. And if there's a way around that, I think so if those two are my concerns, how do I put that into a motion? Or can it just be attached? And I'm not very good at making motions, so that's, I'm really hesitant at doing a motion on that thing, but those are my two concerns.
My question to add on is what is it that we're giving away? I guess my question is, I would love an example, especially in this area, is that, because I'm wondering, we're now maybe limiting staff to be able to do their job. Is there something that maybe I can ask Mr. Johnson to say, is there an example of how flexibility or not us having to be able to vote on it that could cause a concern, if you know what I mean? I'm not sure, what egregious nature could happen without it being able to come to this board. But if this openness to be able to, staff to be able to do something that maybe it's just streamlining the process. So I'm wondering, I guess, Mr. Johnson, is there an example you can give me on this flexibility and this ability of ours to be able to be involved in it? What would be the concern, specifically, to maybe an example, is my question.
Come forward.
We had an example that came before the board. I don't think you were here for that meeting. It was an example where the homes were mostly set back 25 feet in the area. There was one home that was had oops.
You're not seeing the bottom. Yeah, there you go.
Thanks. The home was originally built where the basic structure was 25 feet back, but they had already extended out 8 feet. I think I have my numbers right. And so then they came back and they put in a porch structure even forward of that, and they were asking for an 8-foot front setback instead of a 25-foot setback. And this was something that the staff had said was okay. I know I have a friend that lives in the neighborhood, and he said, well, they didn't ask me. I don't think that was appropriate. And so does that answer your question on it? example?
Well, my recollection though, in that specific case, I think the homeowner even had some neighborhood support on that as well. So, I mean, I think with all applicants that come in front of here, I mean, it's nice when we get 100% support from neighborhoods one way or the other. It makes our job a little bit easier on that, but the majority of the stuff that we saw in this last year did not have 100% support one way or another on. So, I mean, and, you know, so I mean, I understand, and I am, you know, to give staff more leniency and a lot of discretion on things of that nature. You know, I have some concerns at times like this, but for the items that what we're looking at here, I think that they're in a box somewhat too, on all the decisions that can be made. I mean, there's flexible levels that they can go to, but that's it. And I know that, yeah, I don't know, my voice on this right now, I mean, I looked at this pretty hard, and I didn't have much consternation of what they're asking for on here. And
What I found persuasive was you used the example of affordable housing and your goal to streamline the process somewhat for those kinds of projects. And I realize that the ordinance would have a broader application, but I'm persuaded and leaning in the direction that anything that can be done to streamline the process for those individual homeowners that want to build or rebuild their properties. I'm not troubled by, given your experience with other zoning districts and with the language that you've adapted from those other districts, I'm not troubled by giving that kind of discretion to the planning staff. I'm just not.
The only thing I'll add, though, is I do believe even Angst Jr., who's come here, said that he believes that it's too easy sometimes. There just needs to be a line, because what happens with flexibility is, well, you gave it to these guys, so now you have to give it to me. There's, you know, already 5 homes that had been given 8 feet. So I do believe there should be a hard line, and then where that line is drawn, and then here are the things to be able to cross over that line. I do believe in that. With flexibility, sometimes it is a little bit flexible to the level of, well, we can't, because we already gave this guy, now it's that, and now everyone's going to get 8 feet. So I do believe where flexibility is concerned, there needs to be a little bit harder of a line. However we get to that, you know, and however that may be. And on certain things, I don't know. But I have seen that, right, through the time and history, that once we give it to one, that's it, that's the law, so to speak. Maybe, or is that not the case? Can there be flexibility that was given to some and not to others in certain scenarios?
I mean, I think we have to look at the character of the neighborhood, which I think that in itself sometimes is not clear enough, because I think staff has taken a position that it's a much smaller area, and then the board had a case on the beach where a case was made that the whole North Beach should be considered the neighborhood, which I didn't agree with, but that was the board's decision. So, you know, maybe when we come back and do these amendments, we can provide a little more clarity about what area is involved when we're making these decisions. I think that would be helpful. I also would just point out the case in point, you all made the decision, staff didn't make the decision on that particular case. But as Lauren said, you know, it's something that she and I have talked about, adding this into the next round of code amendments that we're going to be doing this year. I do think some improvements could be made. There is a footnote at the bottom of the chart that I feel like is unnecessary, and I personally would like to propose deleting it. It says that these are just guidelines, and that makes me a little uncomfortable.
Yes.
So I, you know, don't have an issue of deleting that. I think there's plenty of flexibility to be had, either at the staff level or go to the board. So I think there's some things to do that we can do to improve, you know, residential infill.
Completely agree.
And how do we address something like that in whatever recommendation we decide to make to City Council today?
You have options, as you always do. Your options are to send this to the board with recommendation of denial, in which case I suspect they'll take your recommendation and have them start over, or they'll ignore it and move forward. You can condition your recommendation on anything that you wish to condition it upon. Changing, and you don't need to, I don't think you need to provide certain language to the staff to say, we want to do X and such, give them the general idea, and if that's the direction from council when it moves to that level, if they agree, then city council will convey that direction. Really, all you need now is a motion crafted, however, whoever wishes to, the first guy with the motion is the person that's going to drive the bus here, and the staff can, make the appropriate recommendation based on how you proceed, but you're not really constrained by any formal process.
Well, like taking the fence, for instance, if we approve or recommended approval in the as-is language, in that instance came up that we thought a 6-foot fence was necessary for
Community
keeping.
gardens.
How would someone achieve that if I keep saying we approved, if this was ultimately approved in its current format?
We would have to recommend a change.
They wouldn't be allowed to go to
Wouldn't be allowed.
6 feet height. So if you'd like to make an amendment to city council, perhaps it's to recommend approval, but to add a provision that community fences in the front yards for, community gardens may extend up to 6 feet under, the circumstances that everyone else has to live with.
And I think our
the
approval would be
open fences.
conditioned upon that change.
That change, and then also, I agree with what Gina said as far as striking the guideline off of that, whatever you said, as far as that line chart, right? And you just mentioned.
I guess I would,
Could you?
it's up to the board. I would like to come back with a comprehensive look at residential infill in our next round of
Okay.
amendments instead of trying to make something piecemeal on the
Okay.
fly here at the meeting.
So you can come back, so we're not going to, whatever we're approving now is not going to approve that residential infill, and you're going to come back with that.
The residential infill is in the ordinance now.
Right.
So what I'm suggesting that to be consistent with the rest of the zoning districts where residential infill lakes, I would recommend you approve this and that we are going to come back with some amendments to residential infill this year.
Okay. This year.
Yeah.
We recommend that specifically to the council.
Yeah, I would like to.
Recommend anything you like to, right?
Yeah.
I would definitely like to.
So our recommendation could include our understanding that although we're approving residential infill in the MDR district, that we have been advised that staff is coming back to this board with additional clarifications, recommendations, or changes this year.
Yes.
I like that.
All right. Anything else, folks?
So how do you make that motion?
Carefully.
So, Bruce.
Yeah.
Bruce,
Have Bruce take a stab at it. And we can all have input in this
Yeah.
motion if necessary. Bruce always does a fine job.
Remember that.
Is there a way we could have like language that say staff intends to come back with additional language later this year proposed?
We have been advised
Yeah.
that that is the intent. All right.
I move to recommend approval of, see where item is today. Agenda. Recommend approval to the Clearwater City Council of case TA 2022-09001 and approval of the proposed ordinance number 9643-2-3 as presented with the modification of allowing for a 6-foot fence around the entire perimeter of a community garden. And also with the understanding that the staff will be presenting to us additional recommendations on modifications, potential modifications of the code to address infill development in medium-density residential areas.
In all residential areas.
All residential areas.
Yes.
Could we say that staff intends, is that a possibility? Staff intends to present additional changes to that?
Yes, that's fair.
We'll say it, I think.
Can I just get clarification about the 6-foot high fence in the front yard is your intention that it be an open style or a solid?
Yes. Open style.
With that clarification on your motion, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you.
We got it.
Appreciate it.
And again, thank you all for the detail provided on these amendments. This is a lot to digest.
We know
but
it's a lot.
You've been
Thank
very
you.
helpful.
It was a lot of years, and it was a lot of good work. Thanks, man.
All right,
Oh, you've been wonderful.
the next item on our agenda is a little simpler. We have two related Level 3 applications and a request to postpone those to an uncertain date in the future, which will trigger additional notice requirements and so forth. You want to speak to that?
No, I was just here if you had any questions, but these were requested to be continued at the last meeting, and this would allow us a little bit of time to finish up a few things in coordination with the Parks and Recreation
All right.
Department before bringing them
For the
forward.
record, let me just read these cases. The first one is case CPA 2022-10002, amendments to the comprehensive plan related to the Parks and Recreation impact fee. The board's reviewing a request to amend the City of Clearwater's comprehensive plan to address the creation of a new Parks and Recreation impact fee system and making a recommendation to City Council. The related case is case TA 2022-10002, amendments to the Community Development Code relating to the Parks and Recreation impact fee. The board is reviewing a request to amend the City of Clearwater's Community Development Code to replace Chapter 54 in its entirety with a revised Chapter 54, creating a new Parks and Recreation impact fee system and making a recommendation to City Council. Does anyone have any questions regarding the request to continue these two items? If not, I'm advised we can take this up in a single motion, if someone would like to make a motion.
Motion, we approve the extensions, thank you, of these two
All right, is there a second?
My second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Right. Are there director's items to come before the board today?
No, there are.
All right. Well, with that, I believe we are adjourned at 2:26.
About that.